So you've done all the hard work already this morning. So it's obvious you should just go to the forum after the service and hear about my sabbatical. I mean, just think of the hazards that you went through getting here this morning, and it's all behind you at this point. So it starts at 9:45 over here in the chapel, the second room in the education wing, which gives you plenty of time, assuming the preacher is not too long-winded, to grab a cup of coffee before you head over. So to say that out loud. Today's focus is going to be the 5 Sundays, the month of October, that I spent with Pastor Torsten Jacobs. He hosted me in his home, the parsonage there, and I learned about the Lutheran Church in Germany and had a chance to assist with worship, which they were very kind to not throw furniture or anything like that at me, so it was good. Today's text is interesting for a couple of reasons, but the thing that I want to focus on in today's readings has to do with vocabulary. So there's not a lot of tricky vocabulary in it in the English translation, but there are some words that deserve some specific attention because they say a lot about what is happening in this text. I want to back up just a little bit to look at the bigger picture in regards to the Gospel of Mark. First of all, we're in the first chapter still. And even though it is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Mark is the oldest of the Gospels. Not to be confused with the oldest of the books in the New Testament, that belongs to Paul, but nonetheless, it is the first of the Gospels. And in fact, Matthew and Luke quote Mark. As we look at the text for today, though, we have a number of passages and vocabulary words that are jumping out at us. First of all, as we have the word, I'm sorry, James, this is, thank you. When we look at the text that we have for today, there is a phrase that stands out at the very beginning. Jesus is in the synagogue. Now, when you think about a synagogue, you're thinking about the church, right? Kind of our context. There's an old way of referring to churches when we think about it. Sometimes it's referred to as the house of the Lord, God's house, right? Kind of the implication is this is the place where God lives, right? When we think back to the people of Jesus' time, the temple, in fact, was understood as the place where God lived. In fact, the Ark of the Covenant that was placed in the Holy of Holies was understood as the footstool of where God sat. There was just one, because how many houses does God need anyway, right? So you've got the one special place. All the special things happen in that place, right? So why is the first verse of this text have the word left in it? Jesus was in the synagogue teaching and left. Why? Wouldn't we think that Jesus, as the Son of God, as God, would be in the synagogue? Because that's where he belongs, right? Like you run around and see him in town and say, hey, I'm missing you at the synagogue. What are you doing out here at the grocery store? What is it? It's kind of like when you're a pastor in public and you run into somebody you know. It is always morning, no matter when you run into somebody. Good morning, Pastor. So why would Jesus be out and about? He left. Part of the important aspect of this text is that Jesus is taking God's work out into the world. It is going out into the community, and things are happening beyond the walls of that place. Now, it's important to remember that Jesus started in the synagogue and left. There's no sense that he's dusting off his shoes and throwing a sandal at the door as he walks out. That's not the sense of things. But Jesus is emphasizing the idea that God's work happens not just in this place, but out in the world. Now, if we think about it, we think about a church. Here we are for an hour during worship, and then, of course, the adult forum afterwards, but that's a different thing. When we think about that emphasis, we realize that it's 1 hour, and I should have done the math, but there's a lot of hours in the week that are not this hour, right? There's a lot of hours of this week when we are at the grocery store, or at work, or at home, or visiting a neighbor, or family, or whatever the case might be. Most of the week is not now. Now, if we compare that, going back, particularly as Protestants, back to the Reformation era, where we might think of monasteries or cloisters, where the whole week would have been in church, right? In this holy place where you would stay, where God's work happens within 4 walls and maybe a courtyard. But the idea is that Jesus is going out. Now, another aspect of this is that he goes to Simon Peter's home. His mother-in-law is sick. It's interesting that Peter is married. That brings up a whole host of questions in regards to our Catholic siblings, the first pope married. But that point aside, his mother-in-law is ill. Jesus goes in, and this is where we get another interesting word in the text today. He heals her, but the word is lifted up. The root word is the same word as resurrection, brought to new life. For what purpose? Now, in the text, we could cynically say Jesus was hungry, and between he and Simon Peter, they didn't know how to work the stove, and they needed somebody, and, well, your mother-in-law would be great at this, I'm sure. That's not exactly the image that we have. The Greek word, actually, is that she serves, diakone. The word that we use today is deacon. The idea that there is service in the world, out and about. We get this powerful word. Curiously, and I don't know how this works in Greek, but the phrase can also be said, including this word of service, lifted up, resurrected through the ground. It's kind of a curious image, this idea of death and then new life. The image is that we as human beings, almost all the time, often in our lives, are bound in ways that do not allow us to live the lives that God has called us to live. It can be something as simple and as painful and difficult at times as being sick. We all know being sick is a large spectrum of what that might look like, from things that are simple to things that are not simple at all, right? These are things among many, many social ills, personal issues of brokenness, whatever the case might be, that prevent us from serving in this world in the way in which God intended. And Jesus is not going to allow us to be defined in that way. We're going to be lifted up so that we might go about God's work in this world. There's a couple of other sections here that I want to point out, and one of them is our last vocabulary word. But before we get there, Jesus gets up in the morning and he wants to spend some time with God. So naturally, he goes to the synagogue. No, he doesn't go to the synagogue. What he does is he goes out in the wilderness, in the dark, to find God, to speak with God. Not the synagogue, not the temple. Again, Jesus is pushing this idea of where do we encounter God? And the answer is everywhere. Is it in a place like this? Absolutely. Is it in places not like this? Absolutely. I'm reminded of a time when I was in confirmation a long, long time ago. I was living in Chicago, and my church took us on a retreat to the local camp in the fall. It was kind of cold. And I remember one evening we had a devotion where they took us on a path in the dark alongside a creek that was on the site. And they would leave one of us about every 50 feet. And we were to stay there for about 15 minutes, and then the counselor would come back down and collect us. And I'll never forget that time. It was not scary. I knew we weren't far from the cabins and things like that. But I also had this sense of being very small in the darkness. And I wonder, as I think of the great cathedrals that I had a chance to visit and other spaces like that, where we often feel very small, that draws us a bit closer to God. But it's not just those places. Yes, those places, but not just those places. Jesus is encountering God in the dark wilderness. Now, there are people who don't like this. They want to bring Jesus back in. Jesus, we built this perfectly good synagogue for you. Can't you just use this place? And it's interesting because the last word I want to leave with you is what Peter does. Peter wakes up in the morning, goes to the guest room, opens the door, and does not find Jesus. And says, where is he? So he goes to look for him. No, he doesn't go to look for him. Did you hear the word? It's kind of a strange one. Hunted for him. Hunted for him. It's a curious verb. I mean, it means what it means, but the image is that he is pursuing something for his own benefit. He is pursuing something for his own benefit. Maybe Peter has been up all night dreaming of the medical clinic that they're going to open with all of the healings that Jesus does, and just think how lucrative this is going to be. It's going to be fabulous. Peter says, hey, Jesus, everybody's missing you in town. There's more to do there. And Jesus says, that sounds fabulous. We're going to Galilee. What? Okay. But again, out. Jesus left. So this week, as you're going about your activities, think of these images. That, yes, the synagogue, yes, the church, but that Jesus left to serve. And that when we hunt for Jesus for our own purposes, we perhaps miss opportunities to serve with Jesus out in the community and the world in which we live. Amen.